foreign in studying history is that depressions are mostly dead in a liquidity crisis. They are dealt with one way or another through easing a monetary policy that changes over a period of time. I described monetary policy 1 interest rates, monetary policy 2 buy financial assets print money, and buy financial assets monetary policy 3 which we are in the printing of a lot of financial assets by the central bank and then buying government bonds to finance the deficit and getting money into the hands of those who wouldn't have added through the normal financial system essentially. Through that coordination in all history, so when we go back to the 1800s, and so on there is that, and so the alleviation will happen in terms of that kind of ease. So when we think interest rates are going to hit zero, and that therefore depressions last, no they don't last because in one form or another. And we're seeing it here today that they will be the printing of money. Now the value of money may not last or it could be depreciated, but in the end, it always will ease. And you will have then that kind of reflation movement and that kind of change. So the hitting of a zero interest rate is not a hitting of a floor on the capacity of central banks to ease. It has to be manifest in one of 3 things happening. If you look at history, you've seen it happen time and time again in the same way, and it lends itself to 3 types of assets responding to it that happened on March 5, 1933. Roosevelt makes the announcement about severing the dollar from gold and depreciating it and reflating it to give the banks the money that they have to pay their depositors. The same thing happened on August 15, 1971, when Nixon got on television and said that he is severing the relationship with gold and printing money. And so on the same thing happened in November 2012 with Mario Draghi making the same kind of moves, and the same thing happened on April 9th. When we had the moves by the U.S. Federal Reserve and the U.S. Congress and Treasury, same type of movements happened in 2008. When the Treasury put together an administration and Congress put together the TAR program and they went to quantitative easing. Those are the things that you always see happening, including times that I haven't mentioned, and when they happen, that is what happens at the equivalent of zero interest rates, okay? It is that kind of movement and that form of easing, and that's what we're seeing. And so easing doesn't end, and the liquidity squeeze and the debt squeeze are dealt with. But it's dealt with through the printing of money that could become manifest in either the real interest rates going down, which in the case of with you have a low level of inflation and zero interest rate, must be manifest with an inflation rate rising, which eventually happens, doesn't usually happen at first, or there's the depreciation in relation to other assets. So what you're seeing right now is that reflation becoming manifest in the money that is being purchased by the Federal Reserve and government, and then going into assets that are equity assets into credit assets and so on. And that's the manifestation, or you could see it in gold, or you could see it in the depreciation. One doesn't necessarily know at the time which is going to happen. So in 1971, when that happened, there was a big decline in real stock prices because inflation accelerated, but you do know that a combination of reflation assets will happen in a way. That's very similar to the cutting of interest rates. When they hit zero, I really believe that in this environment, most investors will think safe is cash, and that's tragic. So you can see that one has to think differently about one's habits when one thinks cash is not a safe investment. It's a risky investment that stocks and bonds are not the same as they were in the past. One has to think of the store-hold of wealth concept rather than just equity returns. One has to think about balancing differently all of these things I'm bringing up are not commonly thought about. They're not part of the common experience of investing over the past many years in order to understand the lessons of history and even what's more likely to take place. One has got to go back to periods that was analogous to this and to study those periods. And when we did that over the last 500 years, you could see that you don't know. If you're going to see the depreciation of the value of money and the store-hold of wealth, so all of a sudden that changes what you define as risk. You used to think cash is a riskless asset. Cash can be the riskiest asset as it depreciates in value. And then you start to think about different asset classes in different locations. So that's what we're doing when we think of what is the diversified portfolio for an easing that happens at that time. That's kind of a reflation portfolio. They're all going to have not nearly enough return, and they're going to be low. So that's a fact of life. We also know that asset classes are affected by monetary policy, so when they lowered the interest rates and did a number of other things in the past that allowed asset prices to rise, we know a number of those things won't be able to happen in the future. So if we start to take a picture of that, we know that in fact, you can go to maybe negative returns. And it's all happening because it needs to happen from an economic point of view. It needs to happen because there's a lot of debt and a lot of liabilities, pension liabilities, healthcare liabilities, insurance, company liabilities, and so on that are coming at us that can't be funded, so they need more returns. And so we've been in an environment where there's been a leveraging up of those returns. So all that liquidity has been put in by the central bank because it needed to be stimulative in a no-interest rate environment. We have all that liquidity looking through all the nooks and crannies of all asset classes, driving their prices up relative to their expected returns, and therefore their expected returns are going to be low, okay? So that's a reality. Then we know that we're going to have volatility around that. You have volatility caused by the sorts of things that we've seen. Some of those things, if you have a downturn in the economy due to the virus, a lot of uncertainty about the virus, it has economic implications. And then you have a new world in monetary policy, that the new world in monetary policy means that no longer is there the allocation of capital in the ways that we're used to it in the old days, though. It would happen in this capitalist system. Central banks would put on deposit cash, and then bankers would come along and think about borrowing that cash and lending it to institutions or people that will pay it back, and that they'll make a positive spread on, and the free market made the allocation of those. Capital is much less so today. The markets are driven by central bankers and central governments to decide that they're going to put money in, so, and how they do that, and the reactions are producing, and will continue to produce volatility. It's very much like the war years, but that allocation of capital and how that is operating will create a volatility. We see volatility, and some you have to deal with that volatility. But that is the character of the environment. So the environment, it's a reality, right? Does anybody disagree with that? The returns of asset classes will be low from just an expected return point of view, and that monetary policy. It from an investment point of view, let me describe it this way: achieving balance, which means diversification, is more important than ever, though it will have a lower return than before. So do you want an asset class return, or do you want a portfolio of well-balanced assets? So when I look at that, I'm saying, let's say if you take a 60-40 stock bond mix, or if you take equities, or you take any one of those things. No. I think the most important thing is to start with diversifying. Well, diversification of asset classes, diversification of countries, diversification of currencies, diversification, because I think that the one thing we know is that we don't know a lot, and it's not easy to necessarily time it about what is going to happen, right? What do you think of our video? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. Also, subscribe to my channel before you go.